Hello, my name is Derek Atkins, and this is Saints and Sinners, where we dive into the Bible to see what God has to say to us in today's world. For the past few episodes, I've been doing a special series entitled Signs of the Time. And as we've gone through this special series, we've been looking at the signs that Jesus gave to his disciples that will precede Jesus's glorious return. We've looked at signs such as false teaching, wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines, and pestilences. And the last time we looked at the sign of persecution and unbelief. Today I'm going to give you one more sign that will precede Jesus's glorious return. So let's look at that sign. In addition to the other signs that we mentioned, there is a sign that's very important that will precede Jesus's return, and that is the completion of the Great Commission. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 14, Jesus said to his disciples, "And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." At the time Jesus spoke these words, those who followed him numbered at most only maybe a few hundred. So for Jesus to say that one day the entire world would hear the message of the gospel would have been a truly mind-boggling idea. This idea would have seemed even more improbable just a few days later, after Jesus had suffered one of the most excruciating, humiliating forms of death known at that time, death on a cross. Then, on the Sunday following his death, Jesus rose from the dead, winning the ultimate victory over sin, death, and the devil. 40 days after he rose from the dead, Jesus gave his disciples a set of instructions that have come to be known as the Great Commission. And these instructions are found in Matthew 28, verses 18 to 20. Here's what these verses say. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the end of the age." 10 days later, these disciples received Jesus' promised gift of the Holy Spirit, and they were empowered to preach the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ, in many different languages to large crowds that were gathered in Jerusalem to celebrate the Pentecost festival. This marked the beginning of the Christian movement. Since then, Christians have taken Jesus's message to the entire world, and today Christianity is truly a global religion with followers in almost every nation of the world. As we saw in Matthew 24:14, Jesus told his disciples that the day will come when his gospel will be preached to all nations on earth, and then the end will come. In other words, once the Great Commission has been completed, then Jesus will return. But has the Great Commission been completed yet? Have all nations heard the gospel message yet? Now, this question begs another question. How do we know when the Great Commission has been fulfilled? By what metric do we measure the completion of this Great Commission? Has the Great Commission been fulfilled once the gospel has been preached in every nation? After all, that's what in Matthew 24:14, Jesus does say that the gospel will be preached in all nations. However, the Greek word used here for nation in the New Testament is the word ethne, which is where the English word ethnic comes from. In Jesus's day, modern nation states as we know them simply didn't exist. Instead, when the Bible talks about nations, the Bible is actually talking about ethnic groups that originally descended from some common ancestor, literally the father of that particular nation. For example, Abraham became the father of all the Israelites. Then through Hagar, who was Sarah's maidservant, Abraham gave birth to Ishmael, whom God promised would become the father of a great nation. Today, Arabs regard Ishmael, whom they call Ismail, as the father of all Arabs. Following the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's daughters got him drunk and slept with him, and both of them became pregnant. Their sons became the fathers of the Ammonites and the Moabites, and these two nations later bordered the ancient nation of Israel. The Edomites, on the other hand, were descendants of Esau, who was Isaac's oldest son and the brother of Jacob, who stole Esau's birthright. So, a better translation of the word ethne in Matthew 24:14 would be people groups. According to peoplegroups.org, a people group is an ethno-linguistic group with a common identity that is shared by its various members. People groups have common history, common customs, common family and clan identities, as well as a common language. So this is the definition of a people group. So if you're wondering what a people group is, here's the definition. Now, depending on where you draw the boundaries for specific people groups, there are anywhere between 11,500 to 24,000 people groups in the world. According to the Joshua Project, about 7,400 people groups are considered unreached by the gospel. This means that less than 2% of the people within each of these unreached groups are followers of Jesus Christ. According to Silk Road Catalyst, 2.2 billion people have never heard the gospel before. In a world with a population of 8.1 billion people, this means that 27% of the world's population has never heard the gospel. So imagine growing up in a people group where you never hear the gospel once during your entire lifetime. It is a very sobering statistic because those who never hear the gospel will go into a Christless eternity. So, by what metric do we say that a certain people group has been reached with the gospel? In other words, how do we measure the completion of the Great Commission? Has the Great Commission been completed when the Bible has been translated into the language of every people group? Has the Great Commission been completed when everyone within every people group has heard and understood the gospel? Has the Great Commission been completed when at least one church has been successfully planted in every single people group? Is the Great Commission fulfilled when there are mature Christian disciples from every single people group who are faithfully living out the Christian gospel within their people group? Or should we use some other metric for measuring the completion of the Great Commission? I hope you see by now that it is quite difficult to measure just when we can say that the Great Commission has been completed. This is part of the reason why Jesus says we do not know the day nor the hour of his return, because in many ways it is very difficult to come to a precise definition or measurement of when the Great Commission is completed. But what is abundantly clear at this point is that the Great Commission has definitely not been completed yet. Not when 2.2 billion people have never heard the gospel yet. Not when only 3% of all Christian missionaries are currently serving among the 27% of the world that currently has no access to the gospel. And not when only 1/2 of 1 penny of every dollar given to churches and other Christian organizations is actually going towards reaching the unreached. And yet, despite the enormity of the task that still remains, and despite the incredible urgency of reaching the unreached with the gospel before they enter a Christless eternity, tremendous progress is being made in reaching the world with the gospel. For example, according to Wycliffe Bible Translator, we are on track to see the Bible translated into every language that needs it by the year 2038. This is being made possible by using new technology to speed up the process of Bible translation, including the use of cutting-edge Bible translation software. There are also growing gospel movements among Muslims, including inside Iran, which currently has the fastest growing Christian population in the world, which is remarkable. So we have Jesus's promise that one day the Great Commission will be preached to all the people groups of the world. And when that day comes, then Jesus will return, but not before that happens. I've talked with some Christians who say that God can complete the Great Commission at any time by simply reaching everyone with the gospel. While that's true, that's not how God has chosen to fulfill the Great Commission. God chooses to fulfill the Great Commission through people like you and me. This is why Jesus gave the Great Commission to his disciples. He wanted them and us to be about the work of taking his good news to all people everywhere in the world. One reason why there are still many unreached people in the world is because there are barriers to reaching these people with the gospel. Sometimes these barriers are geographic. Some unreached people groups live in very remote regions of the world that are hard to reach. Sometimes these barriers are political. Some unreached people groups live in nations that don't allow missionaries. For example, mainland China, a communist nation, has not allowed missionaries to enter its borders ever since 1949. To enter nations like China and other creative access nations, missionaries must find other roles that will meet felt needs among those living in these nations, such as English teachers, medical doctors, business consultants, computer specialists, agricultural advisors, engineers, or humanitarian workers. In fact, almost any kind of vocational skill can be used to serve those living in nations that don't allow missionaries. Sometimes the barriers are ethnic. And what I mean by this is some missionaries come from nations or people groups that have had a bad history for those with those whom they wish to reach. And so because maybe it's because of colonialism, maybe it's because of past military conflict, maybe it's because of some other past conflict. But for whatever reason, a particular unreached people group is very resistant to people from some other group. And so missionaries from that other group might not be able to reach these unreached people, even though they want to help. And sometimes there are economic barriers. And what I mean by this is that some unreached people groups live in such poverty that missionaries from other nations may simply be, quote, too rich to live among them, even with the real sacrifices that some of these missionaries are willing to make. These missionaries may still be living at a standard that makes it difficult to communicate the gospel to those whom they are trying to reach. So these are all different barriers that have made it hard at times to complete the Great Commission. But these barriers should not prevent the global Christian community from reaching the unreached with the gospel. The good news is that God is always at work everywhere. While some nations and people groups may be closed to missionaries, no nation and no people group is closed to God's Spirit. So, are all Christians called to be missionaries? No, but all Christians are called by God to be part of the Great Commission. And so the question is then, what's your part in the Great Commission? How can you be part of the Great Commission? Well, there are several ways that you can be part of the Great Commission. You can pray. You can pray for missionaries who go to unreached people groups. You can pray for different people groups that are unreached with the gospel. And you can pray that the gospel will reach people who have never heard the gospel, whether they live in unreached people groups or in reached people groups. You can also give. God has blessed each one of us with different resources, including financial resources. And we are commanded by God to give generously to the Lord's work. So I want to encourage you to give to trustworthy mission agencies, especially to those that are involved in reaching the unreached with the gospel. Some of these trustworthy mission agencies include the International Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention, Pioneers, Frontiers USA, and many others. You can also give in other ways. For example, when missionaries are on home assignments in their home countries, you can meet with them to hear their stories of how God is at work among the unreached. You can send them letters of encouragement. There are many other ways you can help missionaries. Contact them and ask them how you can help them. And finally, you can go. While not all Christians are called to go to the unreached, some Christians definitely are called to become missionaries. So I would encourage you to prayerfully consider whether God might be calling you to take the good news of Jesus Christ to those who have never yet heard the gospel. And when you find your role in the Great Commission, you'll have the wonderful privilege of joining with God in what He's doing in this world. You'll also be doing your part to help complete the Great Commission. I hope you've enjoyed this series of videos on the signs of the times. And I hope this helps you to have a better understanding of the signs that will precede Jesus's glorious return. Jesus said that He will come back soon. He also said that no man knows the day nor the hour of His coming. And so we have this tension where we know His coming will be soon, but we don't know when exactly that coming will be. So what should we do? We should keep our eyes fixed on Jesus and live our lives faithfully for Him, doing what He has called each one of us to do, in whatever role He has called each one of us to do. Next time, I will begin a new series, and this series will be on the Gospel of John. So we will begin going through the Gospel of John and seeing what God has to say to us today through the Gospel of John. So thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, please hit the subscribe button. And if you have any questions or comments you want to add, please write in the space in the comment section below. So I look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, God bless.